I'm Paige Dykstra. I'm the coordinator for the Community Supported Agriculture UK network. I, first of all, just want to welcome everyone. It's great to have you all here. The impetus for this webinar really was that obviously in the current crisis, lots of people are having to change their business models. Lots of growers are finding their usual routes to market have changed, are no longer there. And there's been a lot of increased demand for direct sales like community supported agriculture or box schemes. But that's obviously a lot to be setting up at short notice and during the Hungry Gap whilst spring sowing is just underway. So we wanted to do something to take some of the experience from the Community Supported Agriculture Network, as well as working with the Land Workers Alliance and the OGA to get some people with experience running box schemes to kind of give some tips and maybe answer some questions for those of you just getting started right now. Just a bit of housekeeping first, because there's such a lot of participants, the demand and interest in the event has really blown us away. It's great to see so many people interested, but because of that, we've put everyone on mute and without videos, but we are recording the session. There's a few ways for you to interact though during the webinar. First, there'll be a couple times when a poll will come up for you to answer a question that we're asking all the participants. So you can click on the answer or choose the ones that apply to you. And that just gives us a little bit of feedback. There's also at the bottom of your screen a Q&A with two little word bubbles at the bottom of your of the black Zoom screen. If you cursor over, you should see a little Q&A. If you click on that, you can ask a question. You can do that at any point during the webinar, and Helen from LWA, who's helping me run things in the back, will be kind of collecting those and putting those to the panelists when it's at the appropriate times. So don't feel like you have to save up your question for a specific time. If something occurs to you while one of the panelists is speaking on a particular topic, go ahead and put it in there. Also, if there's some that we don't get to now, but lots of people asked, we might be able to put some answers up online resources later. So do put questions in as they come to you. And then finally, we also realized that there's a wealth of experience. Like part of the reason we wanted to do this, because I know that the grower to grower, farmer to farmer exchange is really powerful, really useful. And there's a lot of experience in our audience tonight, as well as on the panel. So we want to be able to capture some of that as well. And we'll do that in the chat function. So if you have some experience or some resource that you know about that you'd like to share with others, you can go into the chat function and write that in. Just please try to be very specific so we don't have to scratch our heads as to what you were talking about. So if there was a question about where to advertise your box scheme and no one mentioned, you could say, oh, the CSA network has a map that you can put it on if you're running a CSA, or the Soil Association has their list of box schemes around the country, and you could put that in there. And again, we can capture some of that for the resources and notes that we put out later. So please do feel free to chip in your own experiences or advice, resources that you've come across in the chat function. With that, I'd just like to give a brief little introduction to the title of the webinar was if you're starting a CSA or a box scheme. And I think sometimes people are not sure exactly about the difference between the two. And I think there's a lot of similarities and obviously a lot of overlap amongst them. But as the CSA network, I do want to take the opportunity to just briefly describe community supported agriculture in a nutshell and why it might be worth thinking about right now, even though it may feel like it's in a crisis and that's just an added layer. I think that the community supported agriculture really has two aspects to it. One is a slightly different financial model. So there is usually a subscription or commitment basis, as opposed to a box scheme, which is often week to week. A CSA will usually ask for at least a monthly commitment, and quite often several months or through a season, and that's paid in installments at a time. So there's a little bit more commitment financially on the side of the customer. It's also a social and community model in that there's a lot more relationship interaction, engagement between the members and the farm. Lots of box schemes also engage their community, so that's not an exclusively CSA thing, although quite often I think it's integrated and is definitely kind of baked into the CSA model. Now, currently, I think people may feel as though CSA might be something that has to start more on the community side. If you're a grower, you're setting up a box scheme right now in a crisis, you may feel like that's just an added layer of complexity. But I have been hearing about certain growers out there setting up a box scheme, asking people to commit for 6 months up front because of the volatility in the market right now and the increased demand. Obviously, you're taking the risk of planting all of the crops to supply them through the season, and you're making that upfront investment right now. You don't want those people who have come right now, if the supermarkets start functioning more normally and the lockdown is lifted, to then go straight back to the supermarkets in a month's time. So, you know, if that's something that you're considering, I would say, well, right there, you're already halfway to a CSA, and why not kind of bake that commitment into what you're doing, get that stability in your market going forward, if that's something you decide to continue with. It'd be interesting for us to know, I think we can go ahead and do the first poll. It would be interesting for us to know what kind of stage people are at in their journey. So whether you are already kind of running a box scheme or a CSA and are just scaling up in response to the increased demand and looking for some support there, or were you kind of in the middle of setting one up? This is your first season, or you're thinking of doing one next year and suddenly you're doing it much quicker? Or are you just kind of considering it as a new way to market? So if you want to go ahead and just put in your answer to those, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our panelists tonight. Like I said, we're doing it with the CSA, but also in cooperation with the Landworkers Alliance and the Organic Growers Association. So I want to thank them for their support. And all of the panelists tonight are members of those various organizations. So the first one, I'm just realizing my preparation didn't go far enough. I didn't ask him how to pronounce the name of his farm. It's Nathan Richards. Established, you'll have to correct me when you speak, Nathan. Nathan Richards has established Tro the Rith, maybe?
Troy de Rue Farm.
I probably would have murdered it anyways. He established it in 2008 with Alicia Miller. The 23-acre mixed organic farm is situated in Ceredigion's coastal belt and takes a whole farm, holistic approach to food production. They run a box scheme delivering within 30 miles of the farm and also sell at local producers markets, local retail outlets, and to restaurants. From January to May, they buy in some veg from other Welsh and UK growers, but for their boxes are all their own produce from June to December. So that's Nathan. Peter Richardson started Coles Hill Organics, Westmill Organics, about 30 years ago on 2 acres of field scale, rising to over 30 acres. They supplied around 450 veg boxes into Swindon, Oxford, and surrounding areas, along with farmers markets and some wholesale. The operation is fairly mechanized with high levels of green manure in the rotation, as well as up to 10 polytunnels on no-dig beds. The Hungry Gap was dependent on wholesalers again to fill some boxes, but from June to July, or from about June or July, most of the produce would have been homegrown. Thirdly, we have Amy Willoughby, who's one of the founders of Plotgate Community Farm, a CSA founded in 2015. They offer a weekly or fortnightly seasonal vegetable box to members and currently produce around 65 shares from their 10-acre site. Their distribution to the local communities of Glastonbury, Barton St David and Langport is via collection from hubs and delivery. Amy's one of a team of 4 and is primarily responsible for managing membership and harvesting the veg for the shares. And finally, last but not least, we have Debbie Lay, co-founded Coed Organics, previously Riverside Market Garden, established 2010. And then they switched that to Coed Organics as a workers' co-op of 3 in 2018. And mainly she works on the admin side. The 5-acre market garden is on the edge of St Hilary in South Wales, and they supply 60 veg bags to customers in Cardiff and the Vale of Glamorgan, and attend Riverside Farmers Market in Cardiff. Their veg bags are offered fortnightly, January to June, and weekly, June to December, and can be collected from the field, from hubs, or delivered. And they use the Bucky Box software to manage their memberships. So I'll go ahead and I just take note that I think a couple people have put some questions into the chat site. So it's worth just noting, sorry, that if you have a question, do be sure you put it in the question and answer site so that we get it for the questions rather than into the chat. And also it's worth noting that the chat, you can send a message just to the panelists or panelists and attendees. So, but again, we'll primarily be using that for contributions. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and start by going around and asking the panelists first to just, if you wouldn't mind just saying your name so we know which of you is who of you is who, and then sharing quickly what one thing you wish someone had told you when you were first starting out, or maybe the one thing that you wish you would have done differently if you're starting again. And Pete, do you mind we start with you?
Thank you. Yeah, on a sort of slightly light note, I think I would have not started a box scheme at all. I would have basically run a farm stall, which I really enjoyed for the last sort of 5 years. But anyway, on a more serious note, it's been over 25, 30 years. It was a very organic process. I never really stopped learning over 30 years. And one of the things that I would probably have changed from the beginning is, although I didn't have the option at the time because I was a one-person operation, I would not do the whole thing myself. I wouldn't be a grower, a delivery driver, a packer, and an admin person. That was a real stress. So once I got to a large enough critical mass of boxes, we had a specialist box manager and packing shed team, and then I just did the growing, and that was much simpler. So that would be my one thing that I wished I'd started with.
Great, thanks, Pete. And Debbie, should we move to you next?
Yeah, it's quite funny hearing that. I mean, our setup is we've got a grower, an assistant grower, and I do mainly the admin and the packing. And the thing that I would say is that we would have just kept it really simple. I think we allow too much kind of change for customers. They can like exclude things and add extras and stuff like that. They can have pauses for holidays. And when we were chatting at the farm about what we would do differently, it would be basically take away a lot of choice for people and kind of give them their seasonal delights. And then I realised that would put me out of a job, but then I could actually spend more time in the field actually doing hands-on stuff, which would make me happier. So yeah, keep it simple.
Great, thanks, Debbie. Nathan, do you mind if we go to you next?
Not at all. I'd actually echo both the previous panelists. I think we're all going to agree with each other a lot. On a lightish note, but there's some truth in it. I would have started earlier. I would have started younger, and because I'm getting fairly worn out by this, and it's but that's fine. I also wish we'd had a little bit more capital when we first started. Would have helped a great deal, but we're making this work. I have to say I'm with Pete. in many respects, the box scheme is not my favorite part of what we do, though I'm so pleased it's there right now. I'm so pleased to be able to operate it and offer it, but I've always preferred, in all honesty, the market side of things and dealing with my customers that way. But I am really enjoying the challenge of the box scheme at the moment, and that social interaction that we're allowed to bring as well as the food, and I like that. And there's something which I'll bring in, which is just slightly different, but it's one of the things which I take as sort of my mantra with everything that we do on the farm, which with every motion that we make, we always start with one question, which is, where's the ecology? And I think in these times where things are very tight, it's very important to keep thinking about that, the sustainability and the ecology. That's me.
Great, thanks, Nathan. And Amy?
Yeah, I echo a lot of that. So one of the things I'd written down was getting other people on board. And maybe when you're starting in the CSA, actually that's creating a board who are maybe taking on roles as volunteers, but are able to support you with the business side of things. We employ an accountant, and that's been invaluable, partly because it's really reassuring, and they do tend to pay for themselves even in the early days. So again, that's the kind of getting people on board. In terms of the growing, I mean, we started with a blank canvas, really, sort of 9 acres of pasture. And fertility building is something that, in terms of the growing, that we should have been thinking about from the word go, and we kind of were, but not enough. We had some capital to start us off, and I think capital helps at the beginning for sure. That's it.
Great. Wouldn't we all like more capital at the beginning? Thanks for that. So I think then we'll go ahead and launch into our first kind of topic section. And these, I should say, came out of input from the attendees ahead of time. So we kind of asked people to let us know what burning questions they're having. And these are kind of the topics that came up most frequently. So thanks everyone who gave input ahead of time to that. The first topic we're going to look at is the kind of orders or subscriptions management, payments, and any kind of software that you use. It seems, I think, almost everyone who wrote in said this was one of the things at top of their list, just setting up. Definitely understandable, especially if you're setting up in a hurry in the current situation, or scaling up and dealing with a lot more admin than previously. So I'm just going to go through the panelists and ask you to give a little bit of an overview maybe of what management software systems you have in place. I know a lot of smaller or medium scale ones don't necessarily use official software. It's good old spreadsheets. So whatever system you have in place currently, just briefly describe that. If there's any online platforms that you use for payment management, how do you take payments, and how do you track orders or memberships against the payments? So that was something else that came up quite frequently. Is that something that you do manually to make sure that people have paid, or is that something that some of your software or perhaps a handy bookkeeper does for you? How that works? Maybe we'll just go through at the same order we did last time and start off with Pete, if that's all right, and then we'll switch.
Okay, I just a small caveat here.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a small caveat. I'm obviously not running a box scheme now, but did for a long time, and some of that was specialised, so I didn't really basically do the admin. But I can talk very generally, very briefly about how that came about. Now, I talked to a grower friend of mine, Mark Stay, this afternoon, and he runs. He's gone to 470 from 300 almost overnight, so that's a good indication of what's happening around. I'm sure a lot of other growers on the line will be experiencing that as well. But Mark started, and I wanted to check in with him because obviously he's a very old friend of mine, and we've been doing it for about the same time, or had been doing it for about the same time. And he said to me he was really skeptical about software. He runs Buckybox, and I also ran Buckybox in my later days. It was okay. Buckybox was okay. I noticed it's gone open source now, which may be good or maybe not so good because now there's no backup, of course. So, and I'm not familiar, I'm not a techie, and I don't understand particularly what open source is, but I guess it's fairly free. So that could be a good thing. But one of Mark's hot tips was, he said, keep it incredibly simple. So we've all echoed that tonight. He said, if you are starting from scratch, basically, you can do it in a book. You don't need to have software, essentially. I thought software was great. With 450 boxes, you can't. I reckon there's a magic bullet number of about 120. If you go above 120, you're going to need something, to help you. But when we all started, we were down in the 50s. So if you're below 50 or around 50, you can probably get away with it for a bit. You might not get away with it for very long, but you'll get away with it for a bit. So, and I had the very first software system we had in our business for West Mill Organics was developed by Flight's Orchard, who were a wholesaler, and they were also running a box scheme. And then they basically sold one of their IT guys developed a system, and he sold it to us, and that worked for 10 years. But unfortunately, the flaw with that was when the guy wasn't around and we couldn't get hold of him, it all went pear-shaped, and that's when I went to Buckybox. And Buckybox has got a lot of good people behind it, and we got on all right with it, but I don't think it was the perfect solution. And to be honest, I don't think there is a perfect solution. So, and I'm sorry to be a bit negative on that, but everyone has to make it up as they go along almost, so there might be some other great tips out there tonight. So hopefully that's all I've got.
Great, thanks for that, Pete. Debbie, since we had some Buckybox mentioned there, do you want to tell us about your...
So when I took over the admin, it was in the stage of doing it in a book and on a spreadsheet, and it was a bit patchy. Sometimes there'd be mistakes with orders and payments. So we went on to using Buckybox, and we don't use it from the customer end. So we use it as purely as an ordering kind of software for us to kind of manage the back end sort of thing. And I find it works for us at 60 boxes. It works okay. It stores everyone's addresses and stuff like that. It generates a delivery list. It generates a packing list. We couldn't afford to actually have our own bespoke software, which would have been ideal. Interested in the Open Food Network and how their journey is kind of progressing. We've looked at them a couple of times, but it hasn't quite been right for us. But I think I kind of loop back now. We were talking about payment systems as well, weren't we? So is that right? Yeah. So we use Go Cardless to take payments, and then we match it to the Buckybox kind of software. It is clunky. It is okay for 60 boxes. I think around that. I think you're right. When you get bigger, you need to be a bit more sophisticated. Now I'd say going back to probably a good bit of spreadsheet management with something like Go Cardless, and not allowing people too much swapping and changing. And we use Buckybox for that because it does allow people to exclude items and add extras. They can pause to go on holiday, so they can do that automatically without us seeing what's happening. So I just look when we come to, a couple of days before we're going to pack or harvest, I run the list. We work out how many numbers we've got. But actually now, I think for this kind of scale, a good spreadsheet, just 3 sizes of boxes, a small, medium, large. You can't take holidays, you give it to a friend, something like that, and you have to just eat what's seasonal. And that would simplify things and mean you actually don't need the sophisticated software that allows you all the changes and things like that. Which, that's what that's where we're at sort of at the moment, But I'm also happy if people want to get an email address to me afterwards. If anyone wants to try Buckybox, it is open source now, so you don't get the backup. We haven't had a problem with that, but we didn't find that we needed too much help from them when we did set it up. But if anyone wants to try it and wants me to talk through that with them, I'm happy to do that, kind of separately.
That's a great offer.
Thanks, Debbie. That's really generous. Nathan, do you want to give us your overview?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, I need to put a slight disclaimer in, which is that very much the box scheme and the management of the box scheme is handled by my wife and farming partner, Alicia Miller, who very much takes on that role. But we work very closely together because I'm the grower and I know what we've got on the farm. I'm also the person that's probably out sourcing other from other vegetable growers during the hungry gap. So it's totally locked together with what we do. So hands up, I'm going to have to say ours is essentially lots of pieces of paper on the kitchen floor most of the time. And it just about works. So we've got a database. We have a database with our customers on it. We have gone from being so I have to give some explanation of where we are. So we're in extremely rural West Wales. So we're right out there on the edge of West Wales. So not a large population to start with. And we've gone from predominantly a farmer's market or a local producer's market and aiming our vegetable production at an increase of around 5-fold in the summertime because of tourist flooding, suddenly to having to deal very much more with the local population. And we've always tried to do that. That's always been the base of our business, doing a local market, always being there throughout the year, and then running a box scheme. But we've watched our numbers go from the high 40s, low 50s to this week. I think we've done 148 boxes. We're doing, I think, 190 next week. And so having suddenly the demand on the farm as well to find that amount of food. Thankfully, I've got a lot, we can do it, but it has been challenging. And it's the area which we're definitely struggling with is the IT and actually having a better systems approach. And not having the time to set it up at the moment. We're not particularly techy. We're just under a deluge of requests. We've stopped taking box scheme customers on at this point. We now have a waiting list, and we're trying to add more and more people onto that each week, as long as the farm can sustain it, and I can sustain the amount of food that we can produce off the farm. The things about our box scheme, which I would say, we do 3 sizes of boxes. It's all seasonal food that we can either produce on this farm or within farms around the rest of the UK. It's all certified organic. And we stretch into Northern Europe as we hit the hungry gap, as we really hit the hungry gap. So this week we've got some Dutch cukes and Dutch onions in our boxes. Everything else is in from the UK there, which is quite good. We allow 2 opt-out. We used to allow 2 opt-out items in our boxes. A number of people like to opt out, and we'll change those. With our new box scheme customers, we've just said straight off the bat, at this point, at this juncture in time, we're doing our best to feed you all. We really can't do opt-outs unless you've got a specific health condition. And most people have been really understanding of that. Yeah, spreadsheet would be really useful. One of the things which, we've been sending boxes out today. Wales, it's great until you have 7 Evans and 12 Joneses. That's me.
Thanks, Nathan. That's great. I should just mention previously when we were talking about BuckyBox and there was the conversation about it being unsupported, just to say that that's specific to BuckyBox. It's not because they're open source, that there are open source platforms that are still supported, just to clarify that, because there was a question on that. Before we head over to Amy to hear how you guys manage things.
Okay, so we do about 100 boxes a week, and yeah, it's gone up since since my introduction. We ask people to set up standing orders, and I have a spreadsheet that I just cross-reference with our bank account, so it's very unsophisticated, but it does work. I think people actually quite like the trust element. I think people are a bit fed up of direct debits and people feeling like companies are taking money out of their account, and I really like the fact that we sort of say, look, you're in control of this, you know. So I like that side of it. We have 2 sizes of boxes, but in the smaller boxes, people can choose a more rooty box or a more leafy box. We distribute through hubs as well as doing deliveries, and we always have a swaps box available. So if people do have particular things that they don't like, they can just swap out an item for something that's ready bagged in a swaps box. And when I'm delivering as well, we have a little swaps box in the back of the car that always has items in it that aren't in the box. And people really like the swaps box. They like to feel like they've got a little bit of choice. Yeah, the 2 different varieties of smaller box also gives people a little bit of, like, we've got a number of people who don't have onions, who are on sort of FODMAP diets and things, and don't eat onions and alliums, and one of those boxes doesn't have onions in it every week. So we've tried to tailor it a little bit towards what the feedback we've got from customers, without packing boxes to specific orders. So it's a standard box, but like I say, the swaps box is really good. I think it works really well. Yeah, our payment systems is really simple. I just have a spreadsheet of customers, and we don't, it's all very straightforward. It's Excel spreadsheets. I have investigated sort of more complex forms of software for all sorts of things, but I think for me, it's like it takes you a step further away from the raw data as well. And there's something nice about being able to access your raw information, which is why I like using Excel spreadsheets for things. So I'd have a little bit of a warning with software, and I'd say that goes for account software as well. Is these things can take you just a little step away from your raw information, which I like to be able to access.
Great. So we'll just move to a few questions then. I'll just ask Helen, I think, if we've got a couple questions, to just read those out to the panelists, and we'll just take a couple of them together and then have one kind of, anyone who wants to answer them, if you want to just raise your hand to indicate to me, and I'll call on you and you can answer however many of them you want, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Helen, do you want to go ahead and...
Yeah, so talking about sort of the digital systems, does anyone have any good software for delivery routes, as one question? And then a couple of people have asked about sort of setting pricing. So how do you decide how to price your box, whether it's wholesale or retail prices, somewhere in the middle, and kind of what a small, medium or large box might be costed at?
Great. And if I can just come on the back of that and say on the pricing, I think that's a great question, but just to note that we will, at the last topic is kind of about the contents of the box. So if you want to answer that and just focus on the pricing right now, and then later on we'll go into a bit more depth of how you kind of decide what is in those different sizes. Do any of the panelists want to address any of those? Great. Debbie?
Yeah, we do have a delivery driver as well, and I know he uses an app. I'll find out what it is. I'm sorry, I don't know that, but he does use an app, puts all the addresses in, and it generates like a kind of, you know, a good route to go. Oh no, obviously now he knows the route, and you know there's only a small few changes, but there is an app, and I'll find out what it is and then let you guys know.
Great. Anyone else want to say anything about pricing or delivery route apps?
Just coming on deliveries. Again, super rural area. Some places don't even actually exist on Google Maps, which is bizarre, but we really do cover the backcountry. One of the great things which has happened over the last few weeks, and this is slightly different, but one of the things which we've been very encouraged by, living in a really rural area where people are desperate to get fresh food and wants to self-isolate, is also the number of small community groups who've come in to work with us. So now which has allowed us to up our distribution and actually get more food off the farm, because we don't now have to deliver directly to every single customer. We're delivering to maybe a single drop in a community centre, where the community themselves are now taking responsibility for getting those boxes out into even further rural communities and to standalone properties.
Yeah, I just got a just quick thing to follow on from Debbie. TomTom was invaluable. It wasn't in existence when I first started, but when we got a lot of boxes, that became really invaluable. But obviously, we looked at finding some sort of app for delivery routes, but it wasn't actually very necessary, because once you've done the round, all you're doing is then adding on new people's boxes, and that is taken care by TomTom. So it's fantastic. I mean, I got lost so many times in the first years of trying to find. It would take me half an hour to find an address. TomTom just finds it immediately. I mean, it has its downsides, obviously, but it is absolutely brilliant, and I never needed anything else apart from TomTom.
I think as a CSA, we've got the same customers that we're delivering to every week or every fortnight, and you do just get to know the route, and it's just a case of adding one or two in here and there. So we haven't felt like delivery software is necessary, but I can understand for a box scheme where suddenly you've got 40 new customers, then yeah, delivery software would definitely be the thing.
Yeah.
I have also heard of some of the apps, people cheekily who have that scenario that they have a 1 week free trial. And so you might be able to easily put all of your customers in, get a nice little route, and then add people in one by one. I'll let you decide on the ethics of that one, but it's a little, I have heard of that happening. Nathan, yeah.
Can I actually come in on a question on that? Is that reliant on a telephone or internet signal?
Yes, but my understanding is that you put them in and then the route itself can be exported or that, but I think it depends on the platform, on the app. Yeah, but initially to set it up, but then I think you can use it offline as you're driving around. I just have realized that one of the being new to all of this and many things going on behind the scenes is I've been amiss of not bringing in someone else who is also going to share her experience on a particular platform different from what the others have used, and that's Olivia James, who is with Down Farm and works with Organic Growers Association. Hi, Liv, thanks. Sorry for not coming to you earlier, but I wanted to bring Liv in because she uses a different online platform to share your guys' experience and how you manage your...
Hi, everyone. So I use Open Food Network to manage, we basically run an online farm shop now at the moment. We've transformed from sort of a 15 box CSA to an online farm shop, and I was just going to tell you about Open Food Network. You know, we've used it on and off for the last 4 years, and now I'm so glad it's there. It's really great. It's really good value. We are just starting to pay now, and it's 2% of our sales. I'm not hugely techy, but I find it very easy to use. And if you're not techy, there's really great support from the team that are running it, and there's really good support online, but you just have to have the patience to read it. And I have to admit, I'm only actually reading some of it now, 4 years in, and finding out all the amazing features that it actually does. You can really tell that it is designed for food, but I personally think it worked well for having a range of items rather than veg box. I don't think you need it if you were just running a veg box scheme, but it really helps. But you know, we can add in milk from a local grower. We can add in, we sell bananas, lemons, things like that. It really lends itself well to that. It's got some of the features that I'm just finding that might be useful and worth considering if you're seriously going to go down like a large scale box scheme or online shop. It integrates with Xero if you use that for accounting. You can open your shop to certain groups of people. I heard earlier on the webinar that OFM were doing, Sarah, Tamar, they're just opening it to vulnerable people first, so they can prioritize them and then opening it publicly. But there's more things like that, but honestly have a look on their support to find out all these great features. Just for us, there was a real tipping point, sort of echoing what Pete was saying earlier, is you get to a certain point where you can just like have your legs kicking really fast, but then you really do need some help. So depending what size you are, I think finding that tipping point is key. Although Open Food Network is really good, there's still admin there, and you still have to be able to use the software, and you really need to invest time to use it properly. For us, that tipping point, was going to 60 boxes from 15. What was I going to say? And just having time to invest to optimize it if you were going to use it. So time to go to the webinars that they offer, time to talk to them, time to read all the handbooks. But I would highly recommend it for using. That's what I've got.
Great, thanks, Liv. That's nice to hear some input on another web platform, since there's so many questions on what different people use. So I think then we can move on to the next kind of topic section to hear from the panelists. And then again, as they're speaking, if there's questions that come up, put those into the Q&A, and we'll have a bit of time to address a few of those at the end. Again, although there's a lot of questions coming in and we won't have time to get to all of them, we will try to follow up with some of those in the afterwards. So don't feel like if we don't address yours right now that that's it. We'll try to come back to those afterwards as well. So the next topic we're going to talk about is orders and, is packing and distribution. So we touched on that a little bit with the delivery software, but I think just hearing a bit more comprehensively from the different models you use, whether you do exclusive delivery, exclusive collection, some kind of combination of the two. If they collect, do people come to the farm or other hubs? What packaging do you use and why? Is that paper bags, reusable bags, cardboard boxes, plastic crates? And any tips on efficient packing of boxes or shares? And I would also just kind of add, obviously in the current situation, if you've made any amendments because of COVID-19, to maybe just touch on those as well. Yeah, although I imagine a lot of you could probably just spend the time talking on that, try to kind of take a general view, and then if there's any particular amendments you're making. Maybe we can switch up the order a little bit. Debbie, do you mind if we start with you this time?
Yeah, sure. So I think this question really, really depends on your location. We'd love to have more people come to the farm, but we're not on public transport and it's down a rural lane. So if we could, we do some field pickups for people who are really local to us. Then we combine that with collection hubs so where we, which are really, and actually that's a really nice way of engaging with the community. So we've got collection points in pub gardens, in an art centre, and then we have these little street clusters in popular areas in Cardiff, where some of our customers actually have a box like in their garden, maybe 5 or 6 people in their local area. And so we find that the collection point system really helps kind of foster a sense of community and sort of with our members. And then we also offer home delivery. We charge an extra £2.50 if we do home delivery. So we do, a combination of 3 field pickups, collection points, and home delivery. And it's obviously cheaper if you pick your box up at the field, and then we add a bit more on to go to a hub, and then a bit more on again to go to delivery. People have jute bags, so we pack into a bag. So like those sort of jute shopping bags. That's quite an expensive outlay, so we try and take deposits from people so that when they leave the scheme we make sure they've got their bags back. So basically we take their veg out in a bag, and when they come and pick it up they drop their last week's bag in the kind of collection point, and then we take it back. So we have to have two bags for each person, which is a bit of a nightmare because people always forget to drop their bags off. So then we have a bag of shame which is a plastic bag, which we ask people to occasionally we put a plea out for people who've got bags for life stashed somewhere. And we've stopped doing that obviously because now we recognise that delivering in plastic is more risky from the virus point of view. So we are kind of shelling out a lot more on making sure people got cloth bags, which is a bit easier. And then the other things that we've adapted are we ask customers who are coming to collection points to wear gloves if they're lifting up a box lid or putting their stuff into like a so that they're as protected as possible. It's difficult for the driver. Obviously, he's using hand sanitizer a lot. Yeah, and then we leave all the bags in the back of the van for at least 48 hours before we handle them again, the returned ones. But yeah, that side of it is really difficult at the moment. Much more time consuming and worrying, actually. So yeah, that's our model. I think I've covered most. Oh yeah, we don't pack in paper bags. We find that dries the veg out. So we mainly just wrap like sort of stem stuff in just with a rubber band, and then we use bio bags, which we've found those really successful. We get them from BHGS. I think it's a thistle product or something, but it's like a compostable, type bag, and so we use those. Yeah, I think that's us.
Great, thanks, Debbie. Just before I go on to the next panelist, I just wanted to go back for a second on the pricing question, because I realized no specific figures were mentioned on that. And just to put out the CSA Network, in our questionnaire of members that we did recently, we asked this question, and it's quite difficult, I think, to compare, because obviously people have different share sizes, and what is it, how big a different share is it can be kind of apples and oranges, but I think it is useful as a guide. So for people who had 3 different sizes, the prices averaged out at £17 for the large, £13.25 for a medium, and £9.65 as a small. For people who had 2 share sizes, and sorry, when I say share, for those who aren't familiar, that's just CSA speak for boxes. A veg box is a share of the harvest. So people who have 2 different share sizes, the average out to £12.50 for the larger and £7.90 for the smaller. So if there's just 2 sizes, the prices kind of tended to be the smaller was a bit lower than if there was 3 sizes, but I don't know if that's kind of what that represents. But anyways, those are some price points in case it's helpful for anyone. Moving on to some of the other panelists' experience with packaging and distribution. Nathan, would you mind going next?
Hi. So currently, how we do our boxes, one of the things that we wanted to do when we first started is that we want to look at waste, and whether we want to be a producer of waste or try to get back into some way work within a waste cycle of other people's waste. And so we've actually packaged for a long while using spent waste from other industries. So, for instance, our small box goes out in mushroom crates, which have got a actually rather terrible eco story behind them. So we collect those from restaurants or from pubs or whatever, and we try to just keep recycling those. We might get 9, 10 more uses out of those, and there are so many out there already. And then our large box goes out in cardboard boxes of different sizes, and again, those are just recycled veg boxes. We buy veg in some of the time, so those come in the perfect size for a large box, and we get everything in there. And we've used plastic bags, and we've, until recently, and so things are very much changing at this point, we've always packed into brand new plastic bags. But we've always asked, for anything which would need to not be dried out. Everything else goes into paper bags. We were using printed Soil Association paper bags. Now we're just going to plain paper bags. With the plastic bags, we were asking our customers to return those. We'd never repack into those in the pack house. I think EHO would be fairly unhappy about that, but I'd ask people to give those to me, which I then, because I'm doing direct sales on a market store, I can say to my customer, potatoes, would you like those in a plastic bag? They'll often go, yeah, and here's a recycled plastic bag, would you like, yeah. and then those guys bring those back. So we've been trying to cut down on our plastic use that way, and that's been very popular. We've stopped taking plastic bags back. We do take the plastic crates back, and we've been doing the same thing. We've been doing minimal handling on those. Those have been going, they go in the back of the van, then they go into the barn. They don't go out for a further week, and we're actually disinfecting those. We're scrubbing and disinfecting those, but after a week, after they've sat for 5 days. So, and with the cardboard crates, we don't feel is in as much problem with handling those after the fact, but they also sit for about 5 days. And getting packaging back can be quite difficult from people, but generally our customers are quite good at returning those. As far as delivery, we have always pretty much home delivered, and that's quite difficult in this area. When you gave our bio originally, you said 30-mile distribution area. That's not quite true. It's rather slanted. We go to a market which is 26 miles away, and we go slightly further than that for a few boxes. Most of the deliveries are in within about 15-mile range of here, but 15 miles in remote West Wales is there are a lot of very, very small lanes. We're really having to get from a remote community to another remote community, a remote farmhouse to a remote cottage. There's a lot of miles involved. We don't charge we don't charge for delivery because we don't want to invoke any. There are VAT issues with charging for delivery, which we wanted to avoid. So it's just you're buying a veg box and that's it. Our prices, if anyone's interested, our small is £11.50 and our large is £16, and we're now actually doing an extra large. We don't do many of those. That's by kind of special request with super large families or people wanting a lot more veg, and those are going out at £20. I'm sure there was something else I wanted to add to that, but I might need a prompt. I can't remember what it was.
I'll give you one. So I've just got some reflections. I haven't got any COVID reflections because I'm not running a box scheme at the moment, but I'll give you a few reflections from the past. One of them came up to me quite strongly today was that delivery drivers, I know Debbie mentioned a delivery driver, we always had, in the early days, I couldn't have a delivery driver, and it was a bit of a nightmare because without any delivery drivers, because I couldn't afford them basically with such a small number of boxes, I was out on the road, as you can imagine, driving for quite a long time with a relatively small number of boxes, and there was some ploughing needed doing, there was some planting needed doing, there was just about everything else needed doing in the field, and planting, windows, as we all know, and sowing and drilling can be very small, so that used to drive me insane. So the bigger I got, I'm not quite sure what point I'm making here, but it was just a very frustrating point to be driving. So it's always good, I think, to try and get a delivery driver if you can afford it. Very, very briefly, reflecting on what the others have said, what Nathan said, is that when I think what I wanted to do is be slightly provocative in saying, do you actually want a box scheme? Because I know we're talking about box schemes here, but there are other ways of dealing with this crisis. I found it extremely challenging when it was great when we were up in the 400s, 300s, even 250s. But when I got down to 60, and this is no disrespect to anyone running a smaller box scheme, it's really, really, brilliant running smaller box schemes, but it does make life very difficult. We were delivering to Swindon and Oxford, and I calculated I was doing 8 to 10 hours delivering those 60 boxes. Now, at that point, I knocked it on the head, basically, and I went to supplying other box schemes, wholesale, which is an option, which I spoke to Maggie in Scotland today, and she's doing exactly that. She's not going to run a box scheme. She's going to supply other things into other box schemes. That's how she's going to deflect from her restaurant trade. She's going to sell to other box schemes at a wholesale price, and that's hopefully going to soak up all her excess at the moment. So I would seriously think also about vegetables. I mean, Tolly told me today he's took £2,000 last week. Now, he's got a very sophisticated shop, I have to say, and a very highly geared economic area around Pangbourne. So, but not everyone has a lot of money around Pangbourne, but he has a very strong footprint into his shop. So I'm just sort of throwing in a bit of devil's advocate here that we don't necessarily have to go to a box scheme. There are other things we can do. So for what it's worth, yeah. Oh, sorry. One other thing is, Nathan was mentioning this. What I found really good was group collection points in towns. If you can arrange that, we have some fantastic customers. One customer took 30 boxes in their garage, and they did that for about 20 years. If you can get these are what I call the hard greens. That's no disrespect to anyone, but they were really into what we were doing. And if you can get them, they're gold dust, because those people really want to support you as a community. And you know, box schemes are very similar to CSAs, as already been mentioned. You know, we are in our community and providing food, local food for our community. So if you can get people on board like that, especially in a time like this, it's absolute gold dust. So thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Pete. I appreciate the range of views there. Amy, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just add a few things. So we deliver through collection hubs, and that's one of those is somebody's garage at the moment. And one thing I suppose to think about is what happens to boxes that might be left, or if somebody doesn't pick up. So we've ended up with hubs where the location is very happy to just, as part of their thank you for being a hub, they're happy to swoop in and take up excess. We were distributing through a cafe, and actually they had a real problem with stuff being left. And I was just, we'll just sweep it up, use it in the kitchen, and it didn't quite work for them. We do a delivery round on our way to the hub, so the hubs are connected to a delivery round. And that's grown up quite organically, but it works really nicely because it means that I drop at the hub, do a little round, and then come back and just check in before I go home. We pack into mushroom crates. They're quite nice because you can colour code them, blue and black. Our packing's done by volunteers. So we have a number of workshare volunteers who we say thank you to with a box of vegetables each week. And not all of those people want to be out grafting in the gardens. So we have a volunteer who packs boxes. I get it organised before she arrives and write down what's in the boxes each week and how many of each. So we've got a sort of communications board, and it works really well. Delivery, I find delivery quite a difficult thing to let go of. I think there's almost a formula for how far you are going to have to deliver in order to meet. I mean, I think 100 is the magic number with CSAs and box schemes, and at that point it starts to just about work out. And then certainly for us, that's been our experience. But also you need to look at population densities in your area. We were based at a CSA in Leamington Spa previously with a large population on the doorstep, and they didn't deliver anything, and everyone was happy to come 5 minutes out of town to the farm. We're much more rural here, but we're quite strict. We don't deliver more than about 10 miles, and we've got set routes because otherwise you spend a lot of time in a van delivering vegetables, or somebody does. So I would say really try and keep it tight, and actually do an assessment of what the population centres are around you and where are the numbers, because actually I think there's a percentage of people almost nationally that are going to be your box customers or your CSA customers, and it's worth looking at that. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
That's great, thanks everyone. I think there's a really good range of different tips and approaches there. We'll take a couple of questions. I'll maybe just go ahead and read a couple out there really obvious that have come through. The first, I think Nathan discussed whether they charge extra for delivery or if it's just incorporated into the overall price because of VAT issues. But I'd be interested if anyone else wants to share their how they handle deliveries versus collection and pricing. And then also there's a question from someone who's aiming to do slightly differently than the rural schemes and do pickup boxes from a site in an inner city location rather than delivery. And if any of the panelists have thoughts on what problems might occur or what to look out for in that kind of a setup. And secondly, that individual is also asking if that they'd like to introduce a sliding scheme payment system so it can support more of the community. And has anyone has any experience with that, of trying to make different price points based on income or need? So if any of the panelists want to address any of those.
I know School Farm in Devon, they tried to set up not exactly a sliding scale, but almost like a box sponsorship scheme. So you could opt to pay a little bit more for your box, knowing that that would subsidise somebody else's box who could pay a bit less. And I think that was very successful. We don't have a sliding scale, other than we offer a discount for people who are paying for 6 months, 6-month blocks. And we charge for delivery. We charge £1.50 per box for delivery, which I think is what it costs us, keeping the route very tight.
Yeah, I just got a very small point. In a city, in Oxford in particular, not so much Swindon, funnily enough, but we had a few issues with boxes being stolen. It wasn't a big issue, but it's really handy if you can find somewhere secure to put the boxes. I know Riverford had a few issues with this, and they developed a sort of thing you could buy, but that seems a very extreme measure. We couldn't afford to do anything like that. So yeah, it's always handy to have very clear instructions from the customer as to how to get somewhere secure. But obviously in a terraced house situation, we had to leave sometimes boxes on the doorstep, and I think it was probably students. I don't want to besmirch students, but they were probably hungry, and fair enough, they thought, oh, nice veg, take it, you know. So, but yeah, it wasn't a massive problem. So I don't want to blow that one out of proportion. But you do have to think about security, leaving stuff without it being actually in the customer's domain of their house, basically.
I was just going to say today, in a rural location, some of our deliveries are very alternative. I've left vegetable boxes in people's cars, which they've left in places unlocked, because everyone leaves their keys in their cars around here anyway. I've left boxes under trees, in lay-bys, and
you're in a different world, mate.
It's a very different rural experience. I sometimes have £20 notes left in clefts of trees, which I pick up, or you know, it's under the visor of the. There are ways of being which are different from cities to rural.
Great, thanks for that, Nathan. Debbie, do you have something?
Yeah, we have a collection point in central Cardiff. Well, a few actually. One's in an organic kids nursery. We've got our biggest one is in Chapter Arts Centre, and we started off with a padlock on that with a combination code, and we gave all our customers the code, and it was like a nightmare. People just were always forgetting the code, or they couldn't, you know, a disaster. Just left it unlocked, so we've never ever had a problem. And yeah, so I think it can, that's kind of inner city card. Well, it's not really a city, but like, yeah, we haven't had a problem with theft really. I think that's kind of okay. In terms of deliveries, we do have a delivery charge, and I totally agree about keeping the delivery area tight. We've chopped off some sort of outliers that really make our round ineffective from a financial point of view. What else was I going to say about that? I think that's it.
Great, thanks. So the next topic that we're going to look at is what to put in a box or share. Specifically, how do you decide what goes in? Do you do it based on number of items, weight, value, some magical combination of the three? What's ready to harvest? Crops that are especially good for veg box. So maybe if there's people out there who are used to supplying more of the restaurant trade but are diversifying this year, do you have any recommendations of things that fill special gaps or do really well that in a veg box that they might not think of in other settings or for other markets, offer any extra value crops? So do you offer your customers to have any add-ons, like an extra salad pack or something for an additional fee, or do you just have the set box? And then also, do you offer any add-ons from others, like eggs or bread or preserves, meat, anything like that, in addition to your own produce? Amy, we haven't, I think you've been towards the end. Do you want to start us off on this one?
We try to offer potatoes, carrots, onions and a salad bag every week, because that seems to be what people want in our standard box, and then 4 seasonal items. So our standard size boxes are £12.50, and I think about that as 8 £1.50 items plus a little bit more. This time of year, main crop onions are about out, carrots are about out, spring onions have just started, still getting potatoes. We've put in perennial veg is very useful at this time of year, so we've got about 200 rhubarb crowns. Rhubarb seems to be very popular. We don't generally put fruit in our boxes, but there are some items like rhubarb, autumn raspberries that can fill a nice little gap. We sowed asparagus 4 years ago, and we've just got the first little spikes poking their heads up, so next year we might have asparagus in the boxes. We've also got a patch of perennial onions that I've never cropped, but they're there, and if we had a real gap we would be able to just dig into this big patch, and they've spread really beautifully. We've got a massive patch of perennial onions, so one day I might have to dig them up. We've got some friends down the road who do shiitake mushrooms and oyster mushrooms, Bengrove Market Garden, and that's really good in the Hungry Gap, so we're buying some off them on Friday for Friday's boxes. So mushrooms are brilliant as a Hungry Gap box filler as well. What else? Yeah, I mean, so we go for 8 items. In the summer that goes up to maybe 10 different things in the boxes at really abundant times of the year. We try to communicate to people. We write a little harvest guide, so I don't do a weekly newsletter, but every 4 to 6 weeks I write a harvest guide, which is this is what's coming up, and really trying to sort of educate people about the Hungry Gap and what it is. And oh look, Lent, it falls at the same time. This is the lean time of year. This is about cleansing and all the roots stop, and let's eat lots of nice leafy greens. Yeah, so that ours we don't so we're similar in that June to December it's all our own produce, and then we buy in potatoes, carrots, onions for as long as they're available, January to beginning of June. We try not to buy in too much else, but if we're really short on roots, then we might buy in some beetroot or whatever. We do try and keep the boxes reasonable value, but also asking people to acknowledge that in the winter they're going to be lower value. In the summer they're going to be really high value boxes that they're getting. I think some crops are really key to keeping that going. So things like squashes are really, really kind of important, I think, veg box items, because they enable us to keep the value of the winter boxes high. Things like purple sprouting broccoli as well, they'll come on in the Hungry Gap, and again it's a high value item. So I guess we've kind of learning that there's really key crops that we have to have good harvests of in order for us to keep going year round. I think that's it.
Great, thanks, Amy. Pete, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I echo what you said. I mean, I always put in potatoes, carrots, onions, almost always a salad, and then greens. But it's a real balancing act, I think, and a bit of an art, frankly. You have to. It's a bit like being in a restaurant and creating a really fantastic meal every week, and you've got to get it more or less right. Otherwise, you're going to get drop off. You're going to get churn. All that stuff that we're so used to. one thing that you talked about was a hungry gap, and we always had a bit of a dilemma. This trying to get information about a hungry gap to customers was always tricky, especially if you've got new customers, and it always looks different in the hungry gap to the summer, and that is a bit of a a critical point for boxes, because if it doesn't look good throughout the whole year, you're going to basically, people are just going to get confused. And there's lots of different ways of dealing with this. Amy's just relayed one way of dealing with it, but one of the ways we dealt with it was to actually almost take a loss in the hungry gap. So I think bigger box schemes are sometimes able to do that. I'm not saying we were making masses of money, we weren't, but we actually were prepared, and maybe this is old school thinking, but we were able to just fill them up with a lot of pretty high value stuff. But it was always a delicate balancing act. So it's just everyone has to make their own mind up about how you deal with the hungry gap. It's a very tricky issue. Just very briefly, you do have to watch out for things. We used to put wild garlic in, which was wild harvested. That's an issue in itself, but let's not get stuck with that one, because that has to be certified, obviously. But you can have stuff called wild harvest. But we did run into one. I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, but one issue was that if there were some poisonous leaves within those wild garlic. So just beware, if you're going to go wild harvesting, you really have to know what you're doing, because if you put a poisonous leaf in with the wild garlic, then you're going to have a big problem on your hands, I can tell you. So, and we did run into that once, and we really had to backpedal very fast in terms of what we were doing with wild garlic. That's just one. There's not many things like that, but just a sort of a caveat about going off and finding things for the hungry gap.
Great, thank you. Some good insights there. Debbie, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much the same as Amy, so we'll kind of go back over everything. But in terms of what we put in, we find that doing a farmer's market in the summer means that we kind of tend to put our high-end value crops into the farmer's market and charge kind of, we can get more back from there. And then we keep our boxes at kind of 6 to 8 items, for a small, 6 for small, 8 for a large, 8 for a standard rather, 10 for a large, and we value at around £1.40 a portion, so about sort of same, and that's our kind of break-even point over the year. I think with some of the kind of high-end stuff, things like, I think it can get tricky with things like if you're putting a lot of quite low weight items into the box that are high value. So things like, if we're doing parsley or coriander, garlic or green beans, mange tout, quite often those items, because they don't weigh so much, but they're quite high value, we tend to put those through the farmer's market rather than into people's veg bags. And then say instead in the veg bags we'll do lettuce or something like that that's a bit more bulky, so that they, people feel like they're getting a good value for money. So we find the combination of a box scheme and a farmer's market with a little bit of wholesale for when we've got, kind of big, we try not to have any gluts, but if we do, the combination of those kind of routes to market work really well for us. We have no surplus. What was the other? I think pretty much, I don't want to just repeat what the others have said, but yeah, because it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Debbie. Nathan, do you want to?
Sure, I'll lead off the same thing. Unless people opt out, we really always go with potatoes, carrots, onions. And then I think the trick is trying to keep it interesting. Trying to keep it interesting is quite difficult, particularly at the hungry gap. When we're flush with everything, it's a dream every week. Pretty much everyone gets tomatoes. Tomatoes are fabulous, but you can rotate cabbages for purple sprouting, for you name it, it's all there. It's this time of year where it's really difficult. And what we're trying to do at the moment is, so this week everyone's getting new season chard or spinach out of the polytunnels. The week previous they had Russian kale out of the polytunnels. Next week there will be probably Cavolo Nero. We're just about to hit into some collies. So we're in the growing plan. I'm always trying to think that I can have a good number of different items to go to. Otherwise we find that people get bored and they drop out. And it's also being able to inform people what to do with more interesting things. So, you know, we're about 3 weeks off of kohlrabies, purple kohlrabies, which are going to be fantastic. No one knows what to do with the kohlrabi unless they're a Box King customer, and then they suddenly get that. And I think but that's part of also our role, is to educate people what they can do. We don't do them very often, but like Amy, we also do an update of what you might find in your box in the coming months, and we often link that with a recipe or something interesting on our website, so you can kind of cross-reference those things. Interesting was something which no one's brought up, which is one of the things that we've found, is that sometimes we put too much in our boxes. And you actually watch Box King customers who are weekly Box King and say, can I have a fortnightly, because we're not eating that much. And that's also a tricky thing. So you can overwhelm your customers with vegetables, and trying to find the balance on that so people get good value, but not overvalue because they can't actually deal with it, and trying to keep interest in there. The tunnels, and I'm just going to talk about briefly good things to be growing, and things which work really well for us. Coming out of the Hungry Gap, it's quite nice to know that in our protected cropping, when people are really getting bored of the roots and are struggling with the shootier end of brassicas, and we do a lot of shoots. We do a huge amount of secondary and third pick shoots off of cabbages and brassicas, and they're delicious. You just need to know what to do with them. But as people are getting bored of that, it's really nice that though it's quite a lot of space, we've got the space. So we do broad beans and tunnels, and they come super early, and it's lovely to have those. And strawberries is another one. It's a really nice crack out of the Hungry Gap when you've been rather overwhelmed by some of these things, and you can go, oh, but I did get strawberries and I got broad beans, and they're super fresh. So those are a couple of which I'd highly recommend. Mushrooms, again, absolutely. Mushrooms is a savior. We don't grow mushrooms, but being able to supply mushrooms is good. And very recently, now we're very much in a different marketplace. We're really doing this. We've got a large population of people who are elderly, who are self-isolating in a rural area. We have started to work with other people who we were doing farmers markets with, who can no longer, or a local producers market, who themselves can no longer go to that market. The markets are closed, and they're piggybacking some goods on. So I'm currently we're offering local honey. We're working with a local sourdough producer. And I've got have a cheese on ours as well, which so those are things which can be added on. This is something very new to us. We're still working out how that works. Some of it works quite well. Bread is difficult. We found bread is difficult because it's on pre-orders.
Can I just ask Nathan a question there, because I had something later on to talk about this, but how does hygiene work with the cheese? Because meat is a no-no. We just ruled meat out. But if you start crossing over with add-ons, have you run into any issues with hygiene? Because there must be some in non-refrigerated vans.
No, we've had no issue. What we're doing there, so the cheese is pre-packaged and it's been in the fridge. We go out on a 2-hour run. It goes directly to the customer. It's then up to them. We're not going long distances with it in an unrefrigerated van. And we actually have just been offering that as a service when we arrive. We say, we've got cheese, we've got honey, if you want it, and you sort of buy it there and then. We haven't come into any issues as yet. Though if people feel that we might, I'd like to be informed of that, because we're in uncharted territory ourselves. We definitely don't know all of this. So yeah.
Great, thanks. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to come back maybe with just a quick round of a few short questions related to that topic, and then just give you all a minute or so to, if there's any kind of last things that we didn't cover or things that you wanted to say. The couple questions that have come through specifically on this topic, the first is when you do the pricing, so some of you are saying, for example, that you do it as like £1.50, £1.40 per item. Do you compare that? Where do you get the value for that? Is that based on retail prices? Is that off of like the Soil Association market prices, etc.? Maybe, I think it was Debbie and Amy who mentioned that, but if others have ones. And then I'll just put another question before we get, so that you can answer a couple in a quick round. The other one was, if people are buying in wholesale, whether anyone's experienced any shortages or availability or pricing issues right now due to coronavirus. So if you want to answer those two quickly, and then we'll have a little round of some laughs.
Yeah, so we price for boxes probably just about halfway in between wholesale and retail. Farmers market is always at retail. Well, what was the second part of the question? Sorry, getting tired now.
Sorry, yeah. Whether you've had any supply issues buying.
Oh yeah. Well, a bit like our Benchbox customers, because we've been regular with our wholesaler, they've really looked after us. So you know, we made sure that, you know, we had a good conversation with them, and they've really honoured their supply to us, even though we're quite small. So, but they are saying to us now that things are calming down and things are okay.
Great, thanks, Debbie. Nathan, you had a hand raised. You want to just come in?
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, it's interesting. I'll pick up on Debbie's point. A couple of weeks ago, things were looking very, very dubious on supply chain. The pressure had come onto the UK because European produce was really under pressure. So everyone was trying to buy in from other UK growers. Other UK growers was struggling, and there was a real problem or there seemed to be a lot of pressure within buying from Europe. Thankfully, we don't buy that much, but things like onions and possibly the problem was looking at carrots for a couple of weeks. We're back into our own carrots finally. We just started lifting our own carrots, so that's now off of us. But there were massive fluctuations on the currency exchange, so pricing was all over the place, and that was very difficult to follow. So dealing with the wholesalers, they weren't even putting their price listing out because it was changing. It was like buying on the spot market. Though I have no experience of what that really means, but that's my idea of what that might have been of being like. So that was quite tricky. And actually, how we do our pricing, where we do our compare and contrast, I generally I look at what the wholesalers who we'd be buying from and compare against what we've got and what they're charging, and I look at that, and then I generally go to online and look at what Waitrose would be charging, and then I look at what Tesco's would be charging. I haven't got a Waitrose within 100 miles of me here, so it's mostly sort of based on a kind of Tesco's. Occasionally I can look at Riverfords, and then I giggle to myself and go, God, how can you charge that? But and then I adjust for being in a very deeply rural area. So it's a mixture. But often we're going to a local wholesaler and looking at their pricing. I actually never use the Soil Association organic marketplace. It makes no sense.
Thanks. I see a head nod from Pete on that as well. Pete, do you have any quick interjections on that? I'm aware that our time is, we should, if you have any quick points to add on the pricing.
No, I'd concur with both what Debbie and Nathan said about the pricing in a sense, but I used to use the wholesaler prices, and we'd go roughly 75% with the boxes. They've got to be good value. The boxes got to look good value, otherwise they don't make sense really. But yeah, I always used to think I was a better value than Riverford, and that's something I used to take a lot of pride in. So, because they are a benchmark, and for whatever you think of Riverford, they do set the benchmark, and you know they are very competitive, and but some of their prices are not sometimes, and we can undercut them as small growers, which, you know, not always good, but that's the market we live in.
Great. And Amy, did you want to add anything on those questions, or?
No, the only thing I'd say about pricing is that we tend to look at wholesale lists and monitor wholesale lists, and then maybe increase a percentage. So almost as if we were buying it in, this is how we charge. So percentage increases is useful.
Great. Thanks for all of that. There's a lot of other really good questions there, but I'm aware we are at the time. So I do want to just move on to a couple last things. First of all, to say that this is definitely not the last webinar that we or the Land Workers Alliance or the Organic Growers Association are planning on doing. There's definitely, we're all in collaboration and talking to our memberships about what topics, what assistance is needed right now to help everyone through these challenging times. And in line with that, we're going to put up a poll right now and ask you to give some input on what topics you'd like to see. So we've been able to kind of do an overview of quite a broad range, but for future webinar topics, if you could choose up to 3 of those, just so that we can prioritize a bit, what your kind of top picks would be, or if there's something on there that's really burning, that you don't see there, you can put it in the chat and we can see it that way. And then there's a second question down below, if we specifically have any webinars on particular sales models, which of those you would be interested in, and there you can choose any that apply. And as everyone's just wrapping that up, I just want to do one last kind of open to the panelists if they have any kind of parting words or anything that we didn't touch on that you think would be really important. We are kind of at time now, so if there's any short and sweet passing words or advice you'd like to pass on. Debbie.
Educate your customers. Give them nice newsletters, tell them about the Hungry Gap, explain what's going on at the farm, and then they'll stay with you when things are bad and they're getting Jerusalem artichokes and they've had enough of them.
Thanks. I realized that I had a lot more tolerance for Jerusalem artichokes when I was digging them out of the ground and growing them myself than when I received them in a veg box. So education is probably key on that front. Nathan?
I love to use social media to tell the story of what we do all of the time. So it's kind of it's reinforced. Most of our customers follow our Instagram or our Facebook page. We're constantly updating pictures of what we're doing and why we're doing it out on the farm, so people have an idea of what they're expecting. They also see, to a certain extent, the labour and the labour of our love that goes into producing that food, and bringing the whole story together is epic, and I love it. And I think that our customers love it as well, because they do actually have that opportunity to really see the food that they go eat from seed to table. I'm the person that's going to hand it to them, and we will have grown it. And I think people love to engage with that story, and I think engaging people in that story, it's not difficult to do. It's really easy, and social media is fantastic for that too.
But I think I've realised that social media is not how you sell veg boxes. It's nice for keeping people engaged, but for us, it hasn't been a sort of a sales thing. So if you've got to work out where you put your energies when you're trying to increase and trying to start off.
I'm going to come back. I'm just going to come back very, very, very briefly on that. But we found in a very remote location, we're trying to get to people, because you can constrain the edges in Facebook advertising. That's been amazing. Every time we actually put a Facebook ad up, we'd essentially take on 6 to 8 customers, which was absolutely fantastic. By the way, we're no longer advertising. We don't want anyone to know about us. We can't handle the phones.
Yeah, but you're unique, Nathan, so none of the rest of us can pull off what you do. So yeah, I think in terms of, I don't think box schemes are a panacea. I think you should think carefully about whether you actually do want to do a box scheme, because they are very tricky, as has been explained tonight. And I wouldn't want to put anyone off, but if you are going to do one, keep it really simple to start with. I think many of us have talked about that earlier in the evening. And if you're going to start, just start really simply. Don't overcomplicate it, because it'll make everything much easier in the long run. But that's all I can advise.
Thanks so much. There's definitely still some really juicy, good questions on the side. So please do watch the afterwards. We'll be sending out to the attendees and everyone on the wait list a link to where to find the kind of resources and that, and we will try to address some of those questions afterwards. Unfortunately, there's just not enough time to cover such a breadth of knowledge and questions in an hour and a half. I want to give a really big thanks to all our panelists. A lot of you are, most of you are dealing with the corona crisis and the hungry gap and increased demand, and sowing the new plants for the season, and took time out of your busy schedules to share with everyone else. And I think it just shows what a great community we have in the kind of small scale, medium scale growers in the UK, that people are willing to do that at this time, that everyone's kind of pulling together to see how we get through this. We definitely like to continue to do that, like I said, with our organizations, and want to thank the Land Workers Alliance, Helen, who's been behind the scenes helping make sure that I don't lose track of anything too badly, and Liv from the Organic Growers Association, who gave her own insights and also helped with the planning behind the scenes. Yeah, just big thank you to everyone. I hope it's been of use to those who took part this evening. And like I said, watch this space. We'll definitely use those poll feedback to see what further resources, support, webinars we can do in future. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.